I arrived at my own business launch party to find my name had been removed from every single sign, every program, every banner inside the venue. My business partner, who was also my boyfriend of 4 years, had replaced it with his. 230 guests were already walking through the doors. What I did in the next 45 minutes ended up in the Chicago Tribune. My name is Lyra, and at 29 years old I thought I was building a future with the man I loved. What I was actually doing was building a company that he planned to steal from me, and he almost got away with it. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever had someone try to erase everything you built from scratch. It was a Thursday in November when everything I had spent 3 years pouring my blood into was supposed to go public. Our software consultancy, a firm I had coded the first product for while working double shifts as a bartender, was officially launching. The venue was a converted warehouse space in the West Loop neighborhood of Chicago that I had personally negotiated a discount on because I knew the owner. String lights had been strung across the exposed brick ceiling. The catering team I had hired was supposed to be setting up stations of small plates and craft cocktails along the left wall. There were supposed to be 230 people there, investors, clients, media contacts, and the 2 women who had been my closest friends since college, who had taken red-eye flights just to be in the room when I walked up to that microphone. I was supposed to be the one at the microphone. I had arrived 40 minutes early because I always arrived early. I was wearing a navy blazer I had saved up for, and I had my laptop bag over one shoulder because I never went anywhere without backup copies of everything. When I stepped through the side entrance into the venue, I stopped walking before I even fully processed what I was seeing. The digital displays along the walls read, "Nextbridge Solutions, a vision by Damien Cole." Not our names, his name. I stood there in the doorway holding my bag straps with both hands, staring at the screen cycling through slides I had never seen before. Slides with his headshot, slides with his biography. Slides with a company founding story that mentioned a late-night epiphany and a garage, which was funny because neither of us had ever worked in a garage. I had coded the first version of our product in the back office of the bar where I worked at 2 in the morning after my shift ended and the manager let me stay. My phone buzzed. It was my best friend already inside, her voice pitched low and urgent. She asked me where I was and told me something was very wrong. I told her I was at the side door. She said I needed to come to the main floor but to stay calm. I told her I was calm. I wasn't calm, but I knew how to look it. I had spent the first year of my career being dismissed in every room I walked into. I was a 23-year-old woman without a computer science degree. I was self-taught, which to the people in that world meant I was barely worth listening to. I learned quickly that the moment I let my frustration show, the conversation shifted from my idea to my attitude. So I had trained myself over years to put a wall of stillness between whatever I was feeling and whatever my face was doing. It was a survival skill. That night, it became a weapon. I walked through the main floor and found my best friend by the bar. She handed me a glass of water and pointed at the far wall where the largest printed banner in the room hung floor to ceiling. It said Nextbridge Solutions in clean white letters on a dark background. Damien's name was beneath it, listed as founder and CEO. My name was not on it anywhere, not as co-founder, not as CTO, not as anything. I had built this company's entire technical foundation. I had written the code. I had pitched to the first 3 clients was signed, so I had stayed up for 36 hours straight to fix a server issue the week before a major demo because Damien had been in Scottsdale at a bachelor party and wasn't answering his phone. I also had made one mistake that I will spend the rest of my life being furious about. When we were formalizing the business 18 months earlier, Damien had told me to let him handle the incorporation paperwork because he had an uncle who was an attorney and could do it cheaply. I was exhausted and grateful, and I trusted him. I signed what he put in front of me without reading it carefully enough. I found out the next morning, standing in that venue with my glass of water, exactly what I had signed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Damien arrived 45 minutes before the event was scheduled to start, which told me he had timed this deliberately. Late enough that there would be no time for a real conversation. Early enough to look composed when the guests arrived. He was wearing a charcoal suit I didn't recognize. He walked in through the main entrance, shook hands with the venue manager, and then he saw me. He didn't look panicked. That was the first thing I noticed. He looked like a man who had rehearsed for this moment and felt confident about how it would go. He smiled at me, not with warmth, but with the particular patience of someone managing a situation they think is already resolved. He said my name. He said he was glad I was there. He said he had meant to call me earlier in the week and that things had moved fast, but he thought it would all make sense once I saw the full vision. I looked at him for a long second. Then I asked him very quietly whose name was on the incorporation documents for Nextbridge Solutions. He tilted his head slightly like I had asked a mildly inconvenient question. He said both names were on there, obviously, but that, for branding purposes, they had decided. And then he stopped and corrected himself and said that he had decided that the public face of the company needed to be streamlined. Investors, he explained, preferred a single point of leadership. It was cleaner, it was more fundable. He had spoken to 3 VCs who had told him that founder dynamics in co-led companies were a red flag in the current climate. He was trying to protect the company. He was trying to protect us. I asked him which 3 VCs. He named them. I knew one of them personally. She had been my contact, a woman I had met at a conference 2 years earlier, and cultivated a relationship with over 18 months of emails and coffee meetings. She had taken my call, not his. I was the one who had sent her our deck. I asked him if he had told her that he was removing my name from the public-facing materials for this launch. He said she understood the structure. I understood the structure too in that moment, completely and for the first time. I had been building something for 4 years. And the person I had trusted most in the world, my business partner, my boyfriend, the man who had told me on our second date that he had never met anyone as driven as me, had spent the last 18 months quietly restructuring his legal ownership of what I had built, and was now standing in a venue I had negotiated, surrounded by contacts I had cultivated, about to take credit for work I had done. He thought I would cry. I could see it in the way he was watching me, braced for tears, ready with an arm around my shoulder and a calm explanation of why this was really for the best. I didn't cry. I set my water glass down on the bar, opened my laptop bag, and pulled out my tablet. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was going to make a few calls before the guests arrived. He said that was fine, that there was nothing to worry about, that we could talk about this properly next week when things settle down. He actually said that. Next week. I smiled at him and walked to the hallway. I had 45 minutes. That was enough. Here is something people don't know about me unless they've worked with me closely. I do not wait for problems to arrive. I spend an enormous amount of time thinking about the ways things could go wrong, and I build contingencies for them. It's not anxiety, it's engineering. You account for failure modes before you need to, not after. 6 weeks earlier, I had started to feel that something was off. Little things. Damien taking calls in the parking lot. A meeting with a lawyer he mentioned once and then never brought up again. An email I saw for half a second on his screen before he closed his laptop. The sender was a formation services company I didn't recognize. I didn't say anything because I told myself I was being paranoid. But I made a call to a business attorney friend of mine, a woman I'd met through a professional network, and I told her what I'd noticed and asked her to pull the public business filings for Nextbridge Solutions. What she found was that the operating agreement had been amended 14 months after we signed the original. The amendment restructured the company such that Damien held 68% ownership and I held 32%. The amendment bore my signature. I did not remember signing an amendment. She told me that didn't necessarily mean I hadn't. She told me to check my email records and my calendar for the date on the document. I checked. On the date listed, I had been at a client site in Indianapolis. I had emails, hotel receipts, and a time-stamped badge log from the client's building. I had been in Indianapolis. I had not been in Chicago signing a revised operating agreement. My attorney friend told me my signature on that document was almost certainly forged. She had filed the appropriate complaints with the Illinois Secretary of State and flagged the document for review. She had also, in the weeks that followed, helped me quietly reconstruct the actual record of my contributions to the company. The original code repositories with my commit history, the email threads establishing that I had sourced our first 4 clients, the pitch deck I had built, the contracts I had negotiated. Everything was dated. Everything was verifiable. I had also called the VC, my contact, the one Damien had named, and told her what I had found. I had sent her the documentation. She was furious, not at me. Standing in the hallway of that venue with 43 minutes left, I made 2 calls. The first was to my attorney. The second was to a journalist at the Tribune's business desk who had written a piece on women in tech founding teams 8 months earlier. I had been a source for that piece. She owed me a call back. She picked up on the second ring. I told her I had a story. I told her it involved a forged legal document, a stolen company, and a launch event that was happening right now at a venue in the West Loop. I told her I had documentation for all of it. She asked if she could bring a photographer. I told her to bring whoever she needed. Then I walked back out to the main floor. The guests began to arrive. I watched Damien work the room, shaking hands, laughing, accepting congratulations for a company he had spent 3 years watching me build. He was good at it, I'll give him that. He knew how to make people feel like the most interesting person in the room. It was one of the things I had loved about him. My best friend appeared at my elbow. She had been holding a second glass of water for me, which I found almost unbearably kind. She asked me what the plan was. I told her to find my other friend, the one who had flown in from Seattle, and to get both of them to the back left corner of the room near the sound equipment. I told her that within the next 30 minutes, things were going to happen quickly and I wanted them close. She looked at me for a moment. Then she went to find her. At exactly 7:45, Damien took the microphone. I had heard the intro speech he was planning because he had practiced it in our apartment 2 weeks earlier, thinking he was talking to me about the company. I had listened and made suggestions. Several of those suggestions were now in the speech he was delivering to 230 people. He talked about the problem the product solved. He talked about the market opportunity. He talked about the long nights and the hard pivots and what it meant to build something from nothing. Every word was technically accurate. Every word was framed as though he had done it alone. I stood near the back with my hands folded in front of me and I let him finish. There was applause. Someone near the front called out a question about the technology stack. Damien began to answer, and here I want to give him credit where it's due. He got about 60% of the answer right. The remaining 40% was vague in the specific way that happens when someone has been briefed on something rather than when they actually built it. I raised my hand. He saw me. Something passed across his face, a flicker of the thing he had been suppressing all evening, and then the smoothness returned. He said yes, question from the back. I said my name clearly and loudly enough for the room to hear. I said I was a co-founder of NextBridge Solutions and that I had built the technical architecture being discussed. I said I wanted to clarify the answer to the previous question. The room went quiet in a specific way. Not silent, there were still the sounds of glasses and movement, but the social register dropped. People looked at Damien. People looked at me. A man near the front, one of the investors I recognized from my own email outreach, frowned. Damien said, still holding the microphone, that he appreciated my enthusiasm and that I had been an early contractor on the project. I said I had not been a contractor. I said I was a co-founder listed in the original operating agreement executed in 2022, and that I had authored the core IP of the product being presented tonight. He said we could discuss the corporate structure details offline. I said I'd prefer to discuss them right now, given that my name had been removed from every piece of materials in this room, and I hadn't authorized that. The investor near the front, his name was Arthur, and he had a reputation for being extremely direct, lowered his drink and said out loud that this seemed like something he would want to understand before any conversation about funding. Damien's jaw tightened. Not much, but I had spent 4 years watching his face. He said there had been a transition in the company's structure that was still being finalized, and he looked at me with a very specific expression that said, "We are going to talk about this privately, and you are going to stop embarrassing yourself." I had seen that expression from other people before, the one that told me I was being too much, that I was making a scene. That, however valid my point might be, I was delivering it wrong, too loudly, too publicly, too without concern for how it reflected on everyone in the room. I used to shrink from that expression. I had spent a lot of years making myself quieter because of it. I was done being quiet. I said, still to the room, that the transition he was referring to had involved an amendment to the operating agreement bearing my signature on a date when I was documented to be in another state entirely. I said the Illinois Secretary of State's office was already aware of the discrepancy. I said I had verification records for my location on that date, including a badge access log from a client site in Indianapolis. The room was fully quiet now. The kind of quiet where you can hear the ice settling in drinks. Damien said my name in a low warning tone. Arthur set his glass down on the nearest table and looked at Damien. He asked if there was a disputed ownership issue with the company. Damien said there was not. I said there was, and that I had documentation. Arthur looked between us for a moment. Then he looked at the man standing next to him, another investor I recognized, and they exchanged the specific look of two people who have both just decided to do nothing until they understand what is happening. That look cost Damien more than anything I said that night. His girlfriend, who had been standing near the catering table for most of the evening in a green dress, came gliding across the room. She inserted herself between me and the nearest cluster of guests with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this cue. She touched my arm, lightly, the way you touch someone who is having a moment, and said in a carrying whisper that I needed to take a breath, that Damien had worked so hard on tonight, that whatever I was feeling right now could be resolved without doing this here. I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked at her. I said I appreciated the concern. I said I hadn't raised my voice once and that I was simply providing accurate information to people who were about to make investment decisions based on a fraudulent corporate record. She said that was a serious accusation. I said it was a documented fact. I said the word documented calmly and clearly because it was the most important word in the sentence. She let go of my arm. Behind her, I saw the main doors open. The journalist walked in with her photographer. They were not dressed like press. The journalist was in a blip. The photographer had a camera bag that could have belonged to any guest, but I knew they were there. I gave them the faintest nod. Damien had turned back to the room, trying to recover the momentum. He was suggesting that the event continue, that there were exciting announcements still to come, that he wanted everyone to have a chance to speak with the team. Someone near the middle of the room asked which team. Specifically. There was a small, uncomfortable laugh. Another person asked if the product had any other technical staff. Damien said the team was still growing and that tonight was about vision. Arthur picked his glass back up. He said, politely and finally, that he thought he'd heard enough for now. He shook hands with the man next to him, said something quiet and walked toward the exit. When Arthur leaves a room, people pay attention. He was the third investor to leave in the following 4 minutes. Damien's composure held for another 10 minutes after that. He kept talking. He kept smiling. The event deteriorated the way these things do. Not with a single catastrophic moment, but with a steady and irreversible draining of energy from the room. He found me again near the bar. He had stopped performing. He was looking at me now like I was a problem that had exceeded his ability to manage. He said that I had humiliated him. He said I had walked into a room full of people he had spent months building relationships with, and I had humiliated him publicly. He said whatever issue I had with the paperwork, this was not the way to handle it. He said he had expected better from me, that this was vindictive and small. I had been waiting my whole professional life for someone to call me vindictive and small for telling the truth in a room where it mattered. I said I hadn't humiliated him. I said he had done that by presenting a company I built as something he built alone, in front of people I had personally invited, using work I had done. He said if I hadn't been so difficult to work with, things wouldn't have needed to restructure. I said that was interesting. I asked what specifically about me had been difficult. He couldn't answer that. He could gesture at it, the hours I worked, the way I sometimes pushed back on his instincts, the fact that I had opinions about things, but he couldn't name a single instance where my work had failed or my judgment had cost us something. Because it hadn't. He just hadn't wanted a partner. He had wanted a builder. And once the building was done, he had wanted to own it outright. He said we were done. He said that professionally and personally. He pulled the ring I had helped him pick out for me off the kitchen counter of my own memory. There wasn't a ring, we weren't engaged, and I realized he was ending a 4-year relationship with the same energy he'd used to try to fire me from my own company. I said that was fine. I said I hoped the next chapter went well for him. Then the journalist was at my shoulder. She said she had a few questions for me when I had a moment. She had her recorder out. She was very professional about it. Damien went pale in a way that I found somewhat satisfying. I spent 20 minutes with the journalist in a corner of the room. I showed her the documentation on my tablet, the original operating agreement, the forged amendment, the timestamp records from Indianapolis, the email thread with my attorney outlining the filing with the Secretary of State's office. She asked clear, precise questions, and I gave her clear, precise answers. The photographer took 3 photos of me, one of the banner on the wall with Damien's name on it, and one of the documentation on my tablet screen. She published the piece 4 days later. The headline was measured and factual. Chicago startup's female co-founder alleges document fraud, erased from company launch. It ran in the business section. Within 48 hours, it had been picked up by 2 tech publications and an industry newsletter with a readership of 80,000. Arthur reached out to me directly the day after the article ran. He said he had done his own review and that he was interested in speaking with me about the company's actual technical foundation. We had 3 calls over the following 2 weeks. He did not speak to Damien during that period. The legal process was slow and not particularly cinematic. My attorney filed a formal claim of fraudulent document alteration with the Illinois Secretary of State. A handwriting expert affirmed that the signature on the amendment did not match my signature on other documents from the same period. Damien's attorney sent several letters. I read all of them. I did not find any of them persuasive. 8 months later, the operating agreement was voided by the court. Damien was ordered to pay a significant civil judgment covering my documented financial losses and legal costs. He had also, somewhere in the middle of all of this, lost the 3 investors whose interest he had been counting on. His girlfriend broke up with him around month 5. I only know this because my best friend told me, and I mention it only because she had stood in that venue and put her hand on my arm and told me to take a breath, and I think it's relevant information. My portion of the company was legally reinstated. I brought on a new business partner, someone I knew from my early days in the industry, a woman with complementary skills and a clear track record, and we rebuilt. The product was already good. It had always been good. We just needed to be the ones building on top of it. Last quarter, we closed our first institutional funding round. Arthur led it. I think about that the moment I walked into the venue and saw his name on my work. I've tried to understand how I let it get that far. The honest answer is that I loved him, and when you love someone, your threat detection system adjusts. You explain things away because the alternative explanation requires you to admit you were wrong about a person who mattered to you. I wasn't naive. I wasn't stupid. I was human, and I had misplaced my trust, and that's a different thing entirely. What I know now that I didn't understand then is that the people who want to take what you've built will always tell you it's for your own good. They'll say you're being difficult. They'll say the structure is complicated. They'll say you don't understand how investors think. They'll say next week, next week, next week. There is no version of let me handle the paperwork that ends well when the person saying it has something to gain from the outcome. Read everything. Sign nothing you haven't verified. And if someone tells you that your presence in a room is a problem, the wrong image, the wrong background, the wrong anything, the correct response is not to make yourself smaller. It is to pull out your documentation. If you've ever had someone try to take credit for something you built, your work, your idea, your name, I want to hear your story in the comments. Because the only way these things stop happening is when we stop being embarrassed to talk about them out loud. Hit like if this resonated with you, and subscribe if you want more stories about what it actually looks like to fight back and win. Thank you for being here. You don't have to earn your seat at the table. You just have to know which table is actually yours.